All read nice presentations there with lots of different possibilities we could go in discussing this stuff. But we talked about, several of you commented on basically the notion of authority. And what do we do with that? Well, we noticed a couple of weeks ago when we did informal fallacies that it is a fallacy to argue from authority if the person you're using as your authority actually is not an authority, right? So if you're going to argue from authority, it needs to be from somebody who actually is an authority. Okay, now I need to have you all looking up at the wave lines up here. Okay. That's a joke. You got it. Yeah, if you're going to use somebody as an authority, well, it needs to be somebody who actually is an authority on the topic that they're talking about, right? So, for example, I've studied a lot of ethics, and like with Robert Audi, he's kind of an internationally famous ethicist, and wrote the encyclopedia, or editor of the Encyclopedia of Philosophy, the Dictionary of Philosophy. And anyway, it doesn't make me a great expert, but I listened to Carl Sagan, who certainly was an expert in physics, right? But I listened to him talk about ethics. And I thought, has this guy ever read Aristotle? Where is he coming from? Because this is really bad. So just because Carl Sagan was an expert in physics didn't at all make him an expert in ethics. So if you're going to listen to somebody who claims to be an authority, they need to be an authority on the area that they're talking about. And there needs to actually be able to be expertise in that subject, right? So, but what about the very conception of authority to begin with? So several of you were commenting on the dangers of authority and influencing others to think along their lines, right? Now, that's typically only regarding religious topics, right? But that's the way it's commonly thought of. But I mean, that could be thought of regarding anything, right? Anybody who ends up setting themselves up as an authority, who has influence over others, but who actually isn't an authority in the area that they're talking about. So we have lots of examples like this from Hollywood stars. If they're talking about politics, or if they're talking about the environment, lots of talk from Hollywood stars about the environment, right? And about greenhouse gases and about what we need to do about it, right? Okay, are any of them climatologists? No? Are they influencing a lot of people? Yeah. Okay, do you think that if you ask them, excuse me, famous Hollywood star, you're really advocating for our taking these political actions, which actually would be extremely expensive, but maybe we need to. I'm not saying you're right or wrong, I don't know, but have you thought about the results or the impact of supernovas exploding and solar flares, and they're sending particles through our environment, and those particles having the effect of creating more water molecules that come together that create a lot more clouds that hold down the heat within the atmosphere. Have you thought about that? Oh, and by the way, too, what is your view on ClimateGate? Where in Britain, top climatologists, through WikiLeaks, their emails were exposed where they were saying things like, we'll make sure that anybody who disagrees with our theses regarding climate change, global warming, and the effect of carbon, man-made carbon emissions on it, that those articles never will be published. Okay, now do you think Hollywood star is going to have anything to say at all about what I just said? I seriously doubt it. Are they, though, sort of like our new priesthood? Because all the comments so far were all regarding religious figures held up as authorities and influencing a lot of people, but illegitimately, as an informal fallacy argument from authority, right? And that can be fair enough. But I'm trying to get you to turn your reasoning on yourself in your own situation in this culture. And often we'll have like a new priesthood. So we'll have Hollywood stars who are pontificating about things, very much influencing popular opinion when they have no expertise in the area that they're talking about. Does that make sense? So, the last thing we were left with then was about Plato and his talking about, is it that the gods say it because it's virtuous, or is it virtuous because the gods say it? Or you could use the word pious, right? Whatever. Same thing. So what is it? How is it that something, that we come to know something, or that grounds something as being moral? So this is regarding the divine command theory. So the divine command theory says something is just, moral, virtuous, pious, whatever, because the gods say so, or God, whatever. That's why it's just, because God says that it's just. So Socrates points out that would mean then that that God could say something is that we consider not just. He could then change it to say it is now just, and that would mean that because God said that it's just, that then it's just. This means that morality rides simply on God's say so. That make sense? How do you know if something's moral? Well, you need to know what God said about it. That's how. Not only is that how you're going to learn about it being moral, but that's actually what makes it moral or not, is God saying so. But wait a minute, so then if God says that wanton murder, just going out and doing a drive-by, that's moral, so because God said it, then that would be moral by your theory, right? Wow, that's kind of hard to swallow. It's just on the whim of somebody say so. Okay, then is it the other way around though? Is it that something is moral because, the reason that God says that something is moral is because it is moral. Okay, that means that something being moral is independent of God's say so. Well, if that's the case, it would mean God figures it out and then tells us. Well, aren't there a lot of things we ourselves can figure out? Are there reasons to think, all things considered, lying is bad? You think? Well, we could do the argument reductio ad absurdum. Assume the opposite. So let's say, hey, you know what? Anybody, you can all lie whenever you want. Is this classroom going to be a possibility? What if I lied on my syllabus? You going to be okay with that? Huh? I was just kidding. I told you, if you follow the instructions, good faith effort, decent writing, mechanically and stylistically, I'm giving you an A. But I gave you a D instead. I was just lying. You gonna be okay with that? No, I don't suppose. How about currency? Could currency work? If it was just, if people are fully free to lie? You couldn't have an economy. You couldn't even have this classroom. So you see, by just a little bit of thinking, whatever your culture is, it's pretty obvious that you can't just make lying for any old reason at the whim okay. You couldn't function that way, in any way. Nobody could trust anything anybody said. You could not even have a society. You couldn't live your life. That's not going to work. Okay, so I thought about this concept of lying and came up with some decent reasons to why it can't be okay to just lie whenever you want. Now, did I refer to any scripture in my coming up with this argument? Did I? No. Okay, so I was able to think about it and come up with a moral code. I mean, at least, hey, all things considered, don't lie. We need to have the presumption be of truth telling. So that when I'm telling you what the assignment instructions are and how you're going to be graded and all, we need to be able to assume that I'm not lying to you. Otherwise, why are you even going to listen to me? Why are you even going to bother trying to follow instructions? Right? Couldn't even have a class. So the presumption needs to be for truth telling. Okay, so we can think a little bit about ethics and realize, without referring to any scripture, that it makes a lot of sense to have the presumption be of truth-telling, and that all things considered, you should not lie. All right, well then, if I can figure it out, and God said don't lie in the Ten Commandments, let's say, because God figured it out, well then I guess I don't need to refer to God. I don't need God. Morality doesn't need God, because morality is something that we can figure out on our own. Does that make sense? Now, what we have going on here, though, in the Euthyphro, of hey, it's either A or B. That was the proposition that was presented, right? Either something is virtuous because God says so, or God says that something is virtuous. Why? Because it is. Okay. In the one hand, you've made morality utterly arbitrary and whimsical, which is pretty hard to swallow. Or on the other hand, you have made God superfluous. God says what's moral because God figured it out. Well, we can figure it out too. So why have any God talk, right? Okay, but an option that's not presented here, which, say, a Thomist would present, that means somebody who studied Thomas Aquinas, medieval theology, would say this is a false dichotomy. That's another informal fallacy. What is a false dichotomy? Somebody tells you either pick A or pick B. Which one is it going to be? But what they're not telling you is that there's another option, option C, which could be true. So, what is the other option? Sometimes I like to give you class time, but we're running out of class time to figure out what the other option might be. So I'll just let the cat out of the bag and spill the beans to cross my metaphors. And it's that, what if God's nature is the nature of rationality, such that when God says something, God speaks out of God's nature, which is from rationality, so that God would not contradict God's self. So God would not be saying crazy things like, okay, now it's perfectly fine to do drive-bys and enjoy wanton killing, and it's moral now because I just said that it is. Well, if God were to say a thing like that, then God would not be speaking out of a rational nature. But if God's nature is rational, and God says that, then God is speaking out of God's own nature. So God is not speaking whimsically. But then what about the fact that we can figure something out? Well, if God's nature is what grounds rationality, such that reasoning itself, this goes into the chapter that you read this week regarding Plato, right? Such that eternal truths and reason itself is immaterial, spaceless, timeless. and that we partake of that same rational nature, such that our figuring out moral truths is sort of like, in Einstein's words regarding physics, thinking God's thoughts after him. Now, I know we're getting into theology here, right? But that's what Plato's talking about in the Euthyphro, right? And that was Socrates' question. What grounds morality? Is it arbitrary, or is it something that's grounded in rationality? Okay, the third option is it's grounded in rationality, but that doesn't mean that it's separate from God's nature. Now, we can push this a little further afield, this idea of rationality, and take it away from ethics and just take it into anything rational, like logic or math. What makes the truth... Well, we talked about the false dichotomy, right? Either A or B. It's not A, okay, so it's B. Okay, that's a... what makes that true? If something either is A or it's B, and if it's not A, well, then that leaves B. Let's assume we're not doing the false dichotomy where there's an option C being ignored. All right? Is that true? If there's A or there's B and it's not A, then it's B. Does that make sense to you? Yeah? Okay. So you're seeing a truth because you are bright. We have all this talk of light and seeing, which plays right into the hand of the Plato that you read this week. Okay, what made it true, though? Was it that somebody wrote it on... some scribe wrote it down, chiseled it into stone. Either A or B, not A, therefore B. And you see, ever since then, we've obeyed that scribe. Is that the nature of rationality? That is from an external authority who just made it up, and now we're obedient in the way that we reason. Does that make sense? You think that's how it happens? Somebody made it up and we're obedient. Is that why you agreed with me? When I said, hey, either A or B, not A, so B, and you agreed with me, you did that because you wanted to be obedient, good little boys and girls. Isn't that right? No, I don't think so. Why? Because you saw it. You understood, comprehended. What did you comprehend? What's the nature of it? We've kind of agreed, I think, that the nature of it is not that somebody chiseled it on stone thousands of years ago and now we've all decided to obey it. No. Okay. So is it a physical thing at all? Is that truth? That analytic truth a physical thing? Is it because I said so that it made it true? Is it the truth of it somebody having written it maybe on a blackboard, on a piece of paper? No. It's not a physical truth. Was it true before Aristotle first compiled lots of logical forms and wrote them down? Was it true before that? Or maybe Aristotle made it up. No, he didn't make up the truth. He discovered it. Where did he discover it? Where is it at? What is its nature? Well, Plato's going to say anyway, it's not physical. Huh. Okay, so if it's not physical, it has no physical attributes. So then it's spaceless, timeless? Well, but I'm seeing it. Does that mean then that there must be some non-physical aspect of myself which is capable of intuiting the non-physical truths? Or is it the case that I am just like a video camera? Is it that I'm a video camera? Just seeing and recording. Yeah, but we just said that this truth, or any other analytic truth, is spaceless and timeless, not physical. So if all we're talking about here are my physical eyeballs, then no, I wouldn't be able to see it, because you see, you could understand it and think it even apart from anybody saying it or writing it. Okay, then if I'm able to perceive that which is spaceless and timeless and understand it and know the truth, here's this little truth of the law of excluded middle, either A or B, not A, therefore B. Okay, if I'm able to know that and it's not physical, then I didn't know it through my ears or my eyes. I know it through comprehension, which itself then must be non-physical. So this would be one reason a Platonist would say that truths that are analytic, that are not arbitrary, are real, and that they're not physical, and that then it must be we have a mind which uses the brain and the ears and the eyes and all that to comprehend these truths, to see these truths, to know these truths, but which itself also then must not be physical. That make sense? So that's, well, we're going to get into later, we're going to get into Aristotle and we'll get into Berkeley. But for Aristotle, he's going to want to say, well, we'll get into Aristotle when we get into Aristotle. But anyway, just to give you a heads up on Berkeley, what is he going to say then? Okay, this is very strange in the problem with Descartes. This is very strange because you're saying that I understand truths which aren't physical, which are spaceless, timeless, which must mean there's a dimension to me which is not physical, which is spaceless, timeless, meaning I have a mind, or call it spirit, call it soul, something non-physical, which is able to think these things, see these things, also which are not physical, which regulate the physical. We have mathematical laws that the physical operates according to, but which themselves are not physical. And I've got this non-physical aspect which understands these things. So how can this be? How is it that on the one hand I'm physical, right? But on the other hand, my mind, the soul aspect of it, is not physical? Okay, well then how can the physical and the non-physical interact at all? How could they have anything to do with each other if they're of utterly different natures? This is the problem of dualism that we've let out of the bag now. In our talk of the mind, which can see truths which aren't physical, so it must be the mind is not physical, but yet we know we have a brain and ears and eyes which are physical, which we use in coming to find things out and to know our world. Okay, it seems like we have two things of radically different natures. How does that make any sense? Okay, well, one route you can go is to say, okay, these truths actually are physical. Analytic truths, truths of logic, truths of mathematics. For Plato, heck, even truths of beauty, truths of morality, of justice, that these truths actually are physical. Now, the strange thing about going that route is then this question would be a valid question. How much does the truth, we'll just stick with either A or B, not A, therefore B. The law of excluded middle. How much does that truth weigh? And what color is it? And what does it smell like? Okay, now those seem like very bizarre questions. Don't ask your math teacher those questions about some equation you're getting, right? No, they don't have physical attributes. That's really hard to swallow. Okay, so then what's Berkeley's solution? Oh, well then maybe it's the case that to get everything as of one nature, if we don't want to say that the aspects of thought themselves actually are physical, maybe we want to go the other route and say what we're calling the physical actually is mental. That means then that everything that you look at is manifested by mind. Okay, probably you're going to agree, not your mind, not my mind. Whose mind? God's mind. So, God is spirit and not physical, and everything that God manifests then is God's thinking. So God presently is manifesting this lectern. So this lectern seems to you, you're going to call it physical, but every attribute that you're going to mention about it will be an attribute that has to do with your mind, with your perception. If you say, yeah, but it's the physical that I'm touching here. Wait a minute, tell me about the touching. Well, smooth, light, little bit cool. You're giving me lots of thoughts, aren't you? So Berkeley's going to want to say to put these two worlds together into one is to say, no, actually everything is either a mind or a thought of a mind. I heard you guys talking earlier about if a tree falls in the forest and nobody's there to hear it, does it actually fall? Who's doing that? You were. Okay, good, Aaron. So anyway, that's what this is about, right? So now Berkeley would answer yes because God is present everywhere, but so his point is it's God's thinking the falling tree that makes the tree and it's falling. So everything is of the nature either of mind or of thought. And that's one way of trying to get over this problem of duality between the mental and the physical. On one hand, okay, let's just deny the mental and say everything's physical. Okay, then you're asking how much truths weigh and what they smell like. Okay, well, let's go the other way around. Let's just get rid of the physical. Okay, so everything is either mind or a thought of a mind. All right, that's enough for you guys to chew on for now. Have a good week. Yeah, don't forget to put your computers back. Thanks.